Alright, so Yareli is going to be receiving a bunch of changes as part of a dev workshop, so they've already listed out the changes that they want to do and the proposals, and I want to give my thoughts on this because I feel like they're going in the right direction, but they're kind of deviating from what I would like to see. So I'll leave a link of the dev workshop in the description, but you'll probably, if you actually watch this video after Playstyle returns, then you should find all of these changes in the patch notes as well, so yeah. Provided there's no difference between the dev workshop and the patch notes, well, here we go. So, there's going to be two areas that are being buffed, per se, and that is, of course, her stats and her utility, which I believe are the only areas that exist with the WarFrame. So, in terms of her utility, she's going to be getting Merulina Dashing. I think Merulina Dashing is a very, very good idea. Of course, it gives her a lot of extra mobility, and it also gives her an interesting mechanic to play around with regards to potentially dodging damage instead of just face tanking damage and relying on that damage reduction that comes from being on Merulina. So that's of course going to be really, really good. I feel like though an additional change could be warranted for Yareli, and that is to do with the fact that every time Yareli goes through doors, even if you're not stuck through the door, for example by potentially using control, i.e. crouching when you're on Merulina, that is apparently a seemingly effective way of actually going through doors easily. Even when that does happen though, sometimes I find that the camera then zooms straight into Yareli's point of view and then snaps back to the normal point of view, which I find really, really jarring, potentially motion sickness inducing. And I feel like any cinematographer can tell you, if you have a camera that goes in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out like that, especially when you're going through multiple doors, yeah, it's not a particularly good viewing experience. What I think D could do is program the camera so that when you are on Merulina, that the camera is just locked in relation to Yareli, so that it doesn't move, so that there's no dynamic camera. I feel like that's probably okay. Like losing a little bit of the dynamic camera in order to just frame Yareli so that we know where we're going, I think that might actually be for the best when it comes to Merulina. But of course, leaving the dynamic camera for everything else I think should be okay. But in the meantime, with Merulina in particular, I think a stabilized or just locked camera is probably the way to go. Something they could consider, if they can make it work, if that's not too chaotic, I think that would be really, really good. Now let's have a look at Yareli's stat changes, and here's where I find myself potentially deviating from their idea of buffing her. So let's get into it. First off, we have a C-Snare buff, and the C-Snare buff is a increase in her seeking speed for those C-Snares. Now, I've only started to use C-Snares recently, so I'm not 100% well versed in the use of C-Snares, but this is good. This is a good change. But I feel like what's missing from C-Snares is really some sort of synergy between C-Snares and the rest of her kit, in particular C-Snares and something like Aqua Blades, for example. Potentially something simple like if you have an enemy that is trapped by C-Snares, they would take a bit more damage from something like Aqua Blades. Of course, those C-Snares do have cold damage and cold procs possibly, so perhaps that's the synergy that D is trying to go for, where the flash procs would last a little bit longer because cold procs, but I don't think that's enough. I feel like maybe a damage increase, because I also feel like Aqua Blades could use a damage increase point blank. Perhaps that would be really, really good. I don't know, let me know in the comments if you reckon that's necessary for something like Aqua Blades to actually do more damage to enemies that are trapped in C-Snares. And speaking of Aqua Blades, the Aqua Blade changes are that the range is going to increase by 25%, and the increase in damage and duration will be by 50%. Now I'm going to say this right now, I feel like the duration of Aqua Blades doesn't actually need to get buffed. Right now Aqua Blades has what, a half-minute base duration? That is a huge base duration. And I feel like when you use Aqua Blades on Yareli, or hell, even when you helmet Aqua Blades onto some other Warframe, generally speaking, Aqua Blades lasts for a very, very long time because of the fact that it's affected by power duration. To the point where sometimes I use Aqua Blades and then I kind of forget that Aqua Blades exists for like a full minute. And then I have to use Aqua Blades again, but I don't press 3 nearly often enough for a duration buff to be necessary, I feel like. So I would rather that Aqua Blades just simply gets a higher damage bonus, a higher damage buff if you will, because I feel like 50% damage buff is probably not enough, but perhaps I'll have to actually experience it when the patch comes out in order to make a final judgment. But from what I gather and from what I feel like a 100% damage buff still might not even be enough. Yes, Aqua Blades does do a lot of slash damage and a lot of slash procs, and that's obviously going to be really good against armor enemies because that slash damage goes through armor. But what seems to be the case is that even though the slash procs are going through armor, the procs themselves are not doing a whole lot of damage, and at that point it kind of defeats the purpose of them going through armor. They end up feeling like they're still being affected by armor, if you will. So I feel like the damage of those Aqua Blades needs to be increased by a pretty significant amount just so that it actually has that good feeling of going against enemies with armor. Not necessarily to the point where they one-shot enemies with armor, but at least enough so that it doesn't take 2 minutes to kill just one level 170 corrupted heavy gunner through the power of Aqua Blades. So maybe something to think about. And then of course we have the Riptide changes, or Riptide change, which is just an increase in radius by 25%. Now the logic behind this is that with an increase of the radius of 25%, you should be able to grab even more enemies, and when you have more enemies inside the Riptide, what happens is that you can do more damage with the Riptide, so that's absolutely perfectly fine. But what I feel like is going to be an issue really stems from the fact that when you use Riptide, it doesn't just bring enemies in together, it also flings enemies out in some random direction. And I'm not entirely sure if that's still a good thing. I feel like it kind of seems like more of a crowd control ability than a damage ability. Yeah, it can do some pretty decent damage, but only when you're going up against a ton of enemies. And when you're not going up against a ton of enemies, and therefore Riptide is not doing a whole lot of damage, I kind of want it to be more of like an ensnare type ability almost. To the point where it would not surprise me if a lot of people are actually getting rid of something like Riptide in favor of ensnare, which would actually be more of a grand indictment on Riptide, let's be real here. So I feel like the best thing to do for Riptide, on top of the fact that it's getting a bigger radius, would actually be just a loss in functionality. A loss in the flinging functionality for Riptide. I think that would be really, really good for it. So it can bring enemies in, and it can do an explosion, but it won't fling enemies out in random directions. I think that would be really, really good. Although maybe I'm using it wrong. Maybe I'm supposed to use something like Riptide in the general location of Yareli, and then as enemies are flung out, I can activate something like Aqua Blades, and then suddenly the Aqua Blades could end up hitting the Riptide enemies that have been flung out in a giant circle. Maybe that's the logic, but I don't know, I haven't really been able to make a whole lot of that, make use of that a whole lot, so I don't know, maybe I'm just using it wrong, but let me know in the comments what you think about that. That's pretty much it. So yeah, again, let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. Do you feel like these changes are enough? Do you feel like these changes are too much? Do you feel like these changes are potentially going in the right direction or in the wrong direction? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoy it. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more WarFrame content, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.